Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. Welcome all of you to our fifth meeting. Thank you very much for your time today to join us. And we hope today we will it's a great day for us in terms of progress of our group. And I will quickly walk you through the agenda for today. First, we will start to discuss views presented on section E, subsidiary and ad hoc expert body for 1 hour. Second, we also present the outcome of the additional opportunity for electronic input from December 1st to 11 on the co-facilitators proposal for section D, enhanced sectoral and stakeholder engagement for 35 minutes. After that, I will invite government of Japan to explain their suggested approach to section G and H as we plan for our last meeting for 10 minutes. And lastly, we will try to complete the discussion of the co-facilitators proposal for section G, mechanism for taking stock of progress for 1 hour. Before Kalisa will jump into section E, I will turn the floor back to Secretariat Nalini for housekeeping announcement.
Okay, so before I provide any housekeeping announcements, perhaps we could have some welcome remarks from David Moran. David, you have the floor.
Morning, Nalini. Could you just confirm that you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I guess all depending on where you're located. We'd like to, both Judith and myself would like to thank you and express our sincere thanks, one, to the co-facilitators for their dedication and extremely hard work. I'd also like to continue to express our thanks to the SAICM Secretariat for their support. But above all, Judith and I would like to thank the SAICM community, so participants in this call, for your active engagement in this round of work. Your engagement, your participation through these virtual sessions, through written submissions is absolutely essential. Judith and I are very conscious of the particular times that we are living in, as well as the challenges in participating virtually. That is one of the reasons why we also definitely encourage the submission of written comments. I think we could all appreciate that these are new approaches that we're trying. We would much rather be at in-person meetings where we could sit down, we could chat, we could discuss, go have a coffee, if we have to further understand each other's perspectives. But these are the times we're in, and we do think that it is very important to make progress and to keep the momentum. So part of this is learning as we go with these new approaches and adapting. One of the key things that we wanted to do is to ensure that we're advancing discussions and that the momentum is maintained. This also provides us with the opportunity, as I mentioned, to listen to different views and to try to appreciate and understand them. The last meeting we had, IP3 in Bangkok, was in October 2019. So that is about 15 months ago at this point. And by the time we do meet again, probably in 18 or 19 months in an in-person meeting, it would be like trying to essentially continue reading a book that we started more than a year and a half ago and pick up where we are. So that would be something that would be very difficult. And that is why we feel that it's important to have these in-person sessions, not only to keep the momentum and maintain that momentum, but also to appreciate and advance the dialogue on such a very important topic. I'd like to highlight that at his Broken Planet speech that was made last week, the UN Secretary General mentioned that the new framework for the sound management of chemicals and waste beyond 2020 is one of the key conferences to protect people and the planet and lead the world to a sustainable future. So definitely a lot of importance attached to the work that we are doing here. And the current COVID situation highlights the spirit and the need for everyone to work together to find internationally coordinated responses and solutions to very complex problems. By working together, we definitely feel that we will be well positioned to continue negotiations when we continue in person at a next IP. Judith and I would like to express our sincere thanks for your continued participation. We encourage your input and definitely wish you all the best in the new year. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you, Carissa. Thank you, Tirporn.
Okay, thank you very much, David, for those nice, inspiring words. So good afternoon, good evening, or good morning as well, colleagues. Welcome to this 5th meeting, virtual of the Virtual Working 2 on governance and mechanism for implementation. In line with today's agenda, which was outlined by Tirporn, I have considered the following documents. The first one is the co-facilitator's proposal on Section E, Subsidiary and ad hoc expert bodies, which was sent out for electronic feedback from the 16th to 30th of November, and further elaborated in the annotated agenda for this meeting. We'll open that annotated agenda as we're going to that section. The second document we have in front of us is the co-facilitator's proposal on the remaining parts of Section B, enhanced sectoral and stakeholder engagement, which was sent out for electronic feedback from the 1st to the 11th of December. And finally, the third document we have in front of us is the co-facilitator's proposal on Section G, mechanism to take stock of progress, which is available under the pre-session documents tab for this virtual workshop. So if you could please just be prepared, open up those documents that then will facilitate going through that manner. As we've done for all of the virtual meetings, this meeting will be recorded and made available on the website. In order to take the floor, please use your raise hand functions, or you can put your name and organization name in the chat box, and we will give the order that the requests come in as far as possible. So I'll be monitoring the chat box as well as I'd like to remind colleagues that given the amount of work that needs to be get done today, appreciate if you could be short and concise in your interventions, as well as try and your intervention to only one representative for each group taking the floor. Thank you for your cooperation in this matter. I now hand over to Carissa, who will take us through Section E. So Carissa, over to you. Alex will be managing the slides, so you can just tell him when over to you.
That sounds good. Thank you very much, Nalini, for your opening, and good morning and good evening to everyone, and afternoon for you, Nalini. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Nalini mentioned, we do have sort of a long agenda today, so we are going to jump right in and start on Section E. As Nalini noted, on the agenda, what you have in front of you is a sort of an annotated agenda on how we would like to walk through Section E. That agenda includes a number of the existing sources that many of you referenced in your submissions, in particular 4. The first one was Section A, which is the existing text in the compilation text on institutional arrangements and references the establishment of subsidiary bodies. The second is the Rule 23, which elaborates the arrangements that the International Conference would use to do that. The third is Rule 3, which is related to participation as it's sort of defined in the rules of procedure. And the fourth is Resolution 6 from ICCM 2, which is on the establishment of the open-ended working group. So Alex, if we could go back to the first slide on institutional arrangements. And then as Nalini mentioned, it would probably also be helpful to have in front of you any submission that you otherwise made on Section E, as well as perhaps the compilation text that so you can see as all of these things come up. We have allocated 1 hour to talk about Section E. We appreciate the engagement that everybody has had, but note that we have been running over on a regular basis, so we're gonna try not to do that today. Nalini, could I ask you please to set your timer for maybe 30 minutes and give us a little, you're halfway through reminder when we get there?
Okay, I'll do that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I know we've asked you to do that before and haven't paid any attention, but today we're really gonna try. So we are also going to ask you today to keep your interventions a little bit shorter, as Nalini mentioned. And so let's see how we can do that to get through. You did make a number of submissions. I think 15 or 16 of you sent in submissions on this section. So to the extent that you had, further detail in your submission, please feel free to reference that, but you don't need to repeat all the details of your submission. As noted, we are going to use an annotated agenda as our guide today. There were a wide range of views that we received on Section E. They ranged from deleting the entire section, which I think IPEN and the EU focused on in their submissions. We had a very focused submission from the Africa group with respect to forming a scientific committee. And then there was sort of everything in between. So we'd like to see if in today's discussion, what we can do is get from you a better sense of perhaps how you see Section E, such that we can provide some further guidance on what you want Section E to do, but also what you don't think Section E needs to do. So we're going to start with Section A, the institutional arrangements, which Alex already has up on his screen for you. And this is the first question that we posed to you in your annotated agenda. So with that, I think we will jump right in. There was general agreement in these submissions that the International Conference is the correct or the right decision-making body that would decide if a subsidiary body is needed. It's currently unbracketed, as you can see, in the institutional arrangement section of the compilation text. It's also not in our mandate to review this particular paragraph at this time. Section A was not one of the few sections that was not assigned to your virtual working group here. So I want to be clear that we're not suggesting that we make any edits or proposals at this time to Section A. However, what we would like to do is get a sense from you as to whether you find the language in Section A to be sufficient or what you would like to see in order to give the International Conference the decision-making power to establish the subsidiary bodies as it sees needed, as it finds necessary, in accordance with the rules of procedure. We're going to look at the rules of procedure next. So again, I recognize that, until we get there, that may color your view. But what we are saying here is that the authority to establish, go back one slide, Alex, thank you, that the authority to establish such bodies is what you want the International Conference to have. And then if you look into Section E, we would note that we wouldn't need Section E to do this establishment because it's done in Section A. A number of your submissions pointed out that Section A already established this authority. So I'd like to use, in the interest of time, our usual silent procedure. I hope that given the annotated agenda and our request to you to look at this, that we're prepared to do that. So if you do not, so let me put it the other way. If you agree that Section A does provide the authority that you would want or your organization would want the International Conference to have to establish such subsidiary bodies, we would ask that you do not raise your hand or that you do not chat in the box, but rather stay silent. On the other hand, if you're not of the view that Section A provides the correct or the authority that you would want the International Conference to have, and you see that something else is needed to provide that authority to the international conference, we would ask that you raise your hand or that you chat in the chat box. So I'm going to, again, sort of give a 15 seconds or so for you guys to raise your hand if you need to, or to chat. Hopefully you're ready, and see if we can just test the waters a little bit on this authority that is already provided in Section A. So I see, Suzanne, I see your chat from Canada. So I think we're going to get to this. That obviously is not something that so sorry, for those of you that maybe can't see the chat, Suzanne is asking whether subsidiary includes ad hoc. So that is not something that's addressed in Section A at the moment. And I had, if you can note in the annotated agenda, this is something that we were going to discuss a little bit later. So if we can maybe hold on that, and I understand that I'm asking you to sort of put a little mental note to yourself on that, but I think the answer, is something that we will need to discuss. And Japan in particular raised that in their submission as well. So for the moment, let's put in a mental bracket around subsidiary to come back to how we view that discussion.
Okay, so there are no hands present. Okay.
So that, I think that is, to be honest, what we expected. Looking at your submissions, it does seem that that's what you.
Oh, okay. We've just had one hand up.
Okay.
From Jean Spilansky. Jean, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, co-chairs and secretariat. I just want to check that everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this meeting and for also all the hard work that went into the preparation for this meeting. It's very clear that was not an easy lift. The United States doesn't necessarily disagree with the proposition that this subparagraph is sufficient, but we just wanted to note that in our view, the ICCM is already empowered to establish subsidiary bodies regardless of the existence of this subparagraph. For example, the ICCM established the OEWG in ICCM 2. So in our view, regardless of the existence of the subparagraph, the ICCM already has this authority independently. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. So we would now like to turn to Rule 23. And Alexander, that'll be the next. Thank you, sir. So Rule 23 lays out the details of the arrangements, as we noted in our question 2 to you. Again, it's not in our mandate to consider the rules of procedure, but there are a number of submissions that suggested that for many of you, this rule is actually sufficient to establish the subsidiary bodies and to sort of the arrangements that would go for the subsidiary, that would go with the subsidiary bodies, and that therefore Section E is either not needed or does not need to be addressed, because many of the issues that would otherwise be perhaps raised in Section E are already here. So I'd like to highlight just 2 things as we look at this rule. First, I believe Norway in particular had some specific textual suggestions that it suggested to change with respect to Rule 23. In particular, I believe, and I'm sorry, Norway, I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but my memory is that your suggestions were related to who would chair or who might be able to chair one of these subsidiary bodies. So this, I think, is obviously going to be an important issue, but since the mandate does not put Rule 23 nor any of the other rules of procedure in our particular virtual working group, I'm going to ask Norway to sort of put your suggestions in your personal parking lot for now. And then maybe once we get a little closer to understanding what you all want as stakeholders in Section E, we can revisit whether we might need a footnote or put something in the parking lot to move in our bigger virtual working group parking lot to decide how we might want to proceed. But for right now, Norway, if it's okay with you, I'm gonna ask you to put your textual suggestions into your personal parking lot. And if that sounds fair to you, maybe you could just let us know. And I was just gonna say, if you could let us know in the chat box, that would be great. But of course, as usual, you are already ahead of me. Thank you so much for your flexibility. And then the second issue that I would like to highlight, because I hope you've already looked through Rule 23, is the next part, which is at the very, very bottom, which is 3, which says the conference shall keep under review the composition, effectiveness, and need for its subsidiary bodies as part of the periodic review of the strategic approach in accordance with paragraph 24 of the OPS. So a number of your submissions did talk about the importance of having a mechanism to review subsidiary bodies. And so I just wanted to make sure to call to your attention that mechanism is already there in existing Rule 23. So again, we don't need to open Rule 23 for discussion right now unless there are particular points that folks would like to raise. But what we did want is just to flag it, make sure that we're all on the same page with what Rule 23 does so that we can consider what we need in Section E, or whether we need Section E for some of you, based on what's already in Rule 23. So I'll pause for just a second, Nalini, to see if you have any hands or chats for any particular notes, but if not, we'll go ahead and move on to Rule 3.
Okay, so we have a hand up from Tina. Oh, I don't know who's speaking. A hand up from Tina, followed by Matthias. Teresa, can you put yourself on mute?
Yes, I am having also a hard time. Maybe perhaps if you can't see the organizations that folks are representing, perhaps they can introduce themselves by their organization. You were a little muffled probably because I'm not on mute. But if you can't identify the organization, please let folks know. Thank you.
Okay, so we have Jacqueline Alvarez, followed by Matias Bastos from Brazil. Jacqueline, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much also for the guidance, which is very, very clear. We in UNEP, I'm from UNEP. We have a question regarding the OPS and this paragraph 3 as well. And sorry for this, but have you assessed if there are any loopholes in this? Because if we don't have the paragraph under the new framework, and we are referring in the rules of procedure to the OPS, but we have not discussed how the OPS will be moved. Somehow there is some kind of things that I cannot connect in my mind. So just willing to ask how that will work, and if we are how that will be moved. And in a way, we don't see harm in having that paragraph because it's not contradicting the rules of procedure as they stand. And it's not really saying adding anything, but there is no harm in keeping it either. So thank you.
Matthias, you have the floor.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
All right, so thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Matias Bastos. I speak on behalf of the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. First of all, I would like to once again thank the Secretariat and Madam Co-Facilitators for the hard work that has been done so far. And since we're still compiling all stakeholders' impressions and suggestions during the virtual working groups, we would like to say and reiterate that to us, it is fundamental to make reference to rule number 23 from the current rules of procedures of SICAM if we are to keep Section E. Although we are aware that these rules of procedures have not been yet reviewed to include our beyond 2020 strategies. We do think Rule 23 provides the basic, general, and the great starting point to subsidize our discussions until we make it to IP4 and ICCM 5. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brazil. I recall that from your submission, and indeed you were one of the organizations that noted a strong correlation to Rule 23 and its fundamentality, as you noted. So, Jacqueline, if I can just go back, I mean, to be, of course, in terms of assessment of Rule 23, I don't think any of the virtual working groups have been assigned any of the rules of procedure to look at yet. I think there's sort of a basic understanding that will be done to determine whether additional changes or considerations need to be taken into account. So I think we're moving forward with the assumption that there will be rules of procedure, that they will be based on the existing rules of procedure. And of course, there will be some, I assume, process to address the sort of old instrument versus the new instrument, or the old SICM versus the new framework, however they're going to agree to frame that. So for right now, we're looking at it as if this would be the content. And of course, as we've always said, nothing is over until everything is over. And so I would assume that as stakeholders, if we get to the discussion on the rules of procedure and there are changes to the rules that are inconsistent with what folks want to see in terms of an establishment of subsidiary bodies, that would be a discussion at that time. But that this will be the basis for going forward. And I believe that the experience to date has not necessarily demonstrated that there are any loopholes per se. But I think if what you mean by a loophole is consistency with the new instrument, I think that work is yet to be done. And I duly noted, and I should have, of course, noted that while it is not in our mandate, I assume that it will become part of some mandate, whether it's at IP4 or ICCM 5 or however that unfolds. Okay, Nalini, if we don't see anyone else, I think what we wanted to do was just make sure that everybody had a good reference point on what Rule 23 covered, given a number of the submissions and the reference to Rule 23. So with that, I'd now like to move to Rule 3 of the Rules of Procedure, which is the next slide, which goes to participation and question number 3 on your annotated agenda for today. So we did have a number of comments on participation. The ones that I recall at the moment were from Japan and from the NGO group. And so I would just like to sort of test the waters here a little bit on, given the sorry, I'm a little tired here. Given the phrasing on participation, I'd like to open the floor to see what further elaboration organizations might need or feel would be appropriate or necessary to talk about overall participation in the subsidiary body or any ad hoc body, to Suzanne's point, that might be developed. So I think that the question, and I want to phrase it carefully so that we're all answering the same question, is given what is now in Rule 3 and the applicability of Rule 3, mutus mutandi, to subsidiary bodies, that any subsidiary bodies that would be formed, whether, and in particular what, the need would be to have additional elaboration on the overall participation in a subsidiary or an ad hoc body. And so with that, I'd like to open the floor to see if there are comments on participation.
Okay, so we have Andrea Murtha from University of Cape Town. Andrea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nalini, and thank you to the co-chairs for your hard work, and hello to everyone. So my question is, whether the way it is worded now will preclude from the possibility of having an independent scientific committee in the future. So, and this kind of goes back to the point that Norway raised with the chair of a subsidiary body in Rule 23. So what I'm a bit not clear about is if you want to have an independent scientific committee under this rule, whether the way it's written now will mean that it's actually open to everyone and has to be chaired by a government, which then precludes it from being an independent scientific body. So that's my question. Thank you.
So we had Jill Hannah from GAP who had a hand up, but then she put it down. So Jill, if you please raise your hand because it worked. There we go. Okay.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm having difficulty seeing whether it's on or off at the moment, but I think if I leave my cursor in one place, it works. Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I have to say I'm a little confused. If the rules of procedure are not in our mandate, why are we addressing them? Because this rule is a rule that is quite sensitive in a lot of directions. And I think it would be unfortunate to change it in any way in a process where, as Nalini showed us yesterday, there are vast areas of the world that are not able to participate as well as we would like them to. Although I must congratulate the Secretariat for all the it is making to make participation as broad as possible. While I understand and agree with the point just made by our colleague from South Africa, I am very nervous about touching this rule or even having some kind of opinion, especially since this group seems to use words like agreement. And as my understanding is, we're not negotiating. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to work backwards and feel for perhaps you joined us late and but we opened by being clear that the rules were not in our mandate. But as you can see in the annotated agenda, we also make it clear that there were a number of submissions for language in Section E related to participation, as well as the suggestion that Rule 3, is already comprehensive and covers the spectrum from all stakeholders. So, of course, we would need to look at Rule 3 to understand whether stakeholders with respect to Section E would agree that Rule 3 provides enough of a scope. So I don't. I'm sorry if you haven't perhaps had a chance to review the annotated agenda in advance, but I think that it lays out relatively clearly the process, the reason that we were raising it this morning. So then I guess to go to, and of course I was also very clear in my opening that that we were not going to be proposing, of course, any changes to the rules of procedure, but rather making sure that everybody understands what is there so we can decide whether, I say we, and of course you as stakeholders can decide whether Section E needs to do anything in addition. to go back to South Africa's point, so I think that one would need to look at how you might want a scientific committee to be formed and whether you would want to do that under Section E. And as you note in the annotated agenda, there were a number of submissions, and we laid out the question exactly as you noted of what folks might want Section E to do, and that a science policy committee was raised a number of times by a number of submissions. So I think to the extent that one thinks that having a government chair would be impartial or would necessarily be impartial, or quite frankly, a civil society chair or an industry chair, I think that would apply across the board. That is something that you would probably want to note now, so that when we get a little bit further in the agenda and we talk about what you would want Section E to do, we could have a conversation about what you might see as important clarifications or elaboration with respect to participation in subsidiary bodies. So I would assume that the way you phrased the question was in particular to a scientific body. I assume then that you're differentiating between that. And if that's true, I think that maybe we should add a footnote to have a further discussion about that when we get to that point.
Carissa,
I was just going to note the chat. Is that where you were headed?
Exactly.
Thank you. So sorry, it's obviously hard to follow the chat and my notes and think carefully about your questions and your suggestions. So I just would note for anyone that can't read the chat that Canada has said that the group's mandate does include identifying gaps, and that this could include suggestions that certain elements of the rules of procedures could need to be reviewed. And I think, to be honest, that is exactly sort of where we were headed in terms of adding a footnote and to add a footnote and to come back to this once we get to a little further in the agenda, where we're going to talk about the functions or other functions that you see Section E might want to do. So I hope that sort of goes to your point, South Africa, and we can come back to that. We do not need to we can come back to that when we get to that question.
Okay, I think there's no more hands up, just UK supporting Canada on that point. So move forward. We're almost at the halfway mark, Carissa, so just FYI.
Thank you, and I see a note from Andrea saying that that's acceptable to him. So thank you so much. Okay, so let's move on, and we'd like to talk a little bit next with respect to the OEWG. So there was general agreement that the OEWG should continue. I think many, if not most, of your submissions went to that, and we'll discuss a little bit later, perhaps in a few minutes, the possible mechanisms to execute how the OEWG might move forward. The EU, for example, noted that one way to do that, or two ways to maybe do that, is to use a resolution, as was done in ICCM2, or to establish a subsidiary body within the actual Section A on institutional arrangements. So taking into account what we have already talked about, I think the first thing we want to do is just make sure that we did indeed capture the very strong agreement that all of you seem to present in your submissions, that the OEWG is necessary and desirable to have it continue, as we noted in number 4 on your annotated agenda. So without discussing for the moment how or the modality by which the OEWG might continue, I'd like to just first test the waters that you all agree that the OEWG should continue. And I'm going to do that using our normal sort of silent procedure and give you 15 seconds or so to talk a little bit, to think or just confirm that you do agree that the OEWG should continue as a subsidiary body. If you disagree with that, please chat or raise your hand. If you do not, again, in the interest of time, we'll use our silent procedure.
We have one raised hand.
Okay.
Juliana from GAP, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I will be brief. I would, however, Carissa, like to point out that I have read the documents and I joined on time. The question is simply for me, for GAP, one of, is there really a difference between the OEWG and the ICCM? It depends on periodicity. And it's not necessarily the case that the two things do different work. So for me, this is not a question that we can actually determine now, because we have to understand what the periodicity of ICCM is and what the actual difference between that and the OEWG is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I assume that we will, of course, have some further discussion, because you are right that obviously there, if you look especially at the rules of procedure, you can see that, sorry, not the rules of procedure, but the resolution that the ICCM passed at its second session, that there are a number of overlaps in their mandates and overlaps in the kinds of issues that they look at. And of course, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that the Bureau is actually the same for both groups, which of course also leads to the question of whether it's a different group or not. So I think that is something that I presume that when the rules of procedure come up, that's also something that we may want to make a footnote to, just to note that there may be a question of overlapping of time, and I think periodicity is just not a word I'm sure I was familiar with before. Can be noted. Okay. I'm just looking in the chat. I would note that there is a note from UNEP to everyone that says that in their understanding, the big difference is the decision-making power, unless ICCM gives that to the OEWG. And so, of course, obviously, that is the ultimate authority of the international conference. And so, as noted, there is some overlap sometimes in their mandates from one to the other. But yes, thank you, Jacqueline, duly noted. Okay. With that, I'd now like to note, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, that the EU in its submission noted that there's several options by which the continuation of the OEWG might occur. And in particular, the EU noted in Section A under institutional arrangements as one option, and then also highlighted Resolution 6 at ICCM as another. So I'd like to move to the next slide so that you were already ahead of me, Alexander. Thank you so much. That the resolution is here. I would note that it is 2 pages on the slide, and you'll also see it, of course, on your annotated agenda where we put that in an annex to the bottom. So I'd like to ask you to take a look at the resolution and take note of the kinds of provisions that were established for the OEWG, so that we can perhaps look and just see what folks were referencing. I think this goes a little bit to Jill's point as to sort of what is the difference in terms of timing is probably the main one, and that Jacqueline also noted that their power does come from the ICCM. So perhaps, Vasilius, if I could put you on the spot for just a second, maybe you could give a very quick, short sharing of the EU's initial thinking from its submission on this resolution to share with others what you were thinking as you put your submission together with respect to the relationship between the resolution and perhaps something in Section A. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Carissa. I hope you can hear me well. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, and thank you, Carissa, for giving me the floor on this. Indeed, we have addressed two options with regard to this question. I'm very glad to hear today that obviously we are all on the same page regarding the need for continuing the open-ended working group. So looking at the resolution 2.6, this is one of the tools, the options we have at hand to work further with this. We think that there may be or there is a need for some adjustments. For instance, there is language there, as you have it on your screen, on the 2020 goal, global plan of action, and things like that. But essentially, the spirit of this resolution is something that we think we should keep and further work with. So that would be one possibility, to see how to use the existing resolution for an open-ended working group in the future. The other option would be to think more in a more fundamental way, if I may say so. That is to say, to discuss and hear from the stakeholders, from the community, if establishing an open-ended working group as a permanent element in the future regime would qualify it as an instrument or an element of institutional arrangements next to the conference, the Secretariat and the Bureau. And that said, I would like to clarify that we in the EU and its member states are not providing a final conclusion on this, but I think, or we think, it is something to consider in the further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vasilios. Appreciate your willingness to share your views with the group and for your submission. So just before we close this section, I just want to note that sort of in the chat box, I think we again see some comments about the frequency, that the role of the OEWG will depend or may depend on the frequency of the international conferences. And of course, that's true, and I see support from Norway. I think just on Norway's suggestion, I want to make sure you're underlining that whether an OEWG, I think what you mean is not whether an OEWG is needed, but whether any particular meeting of the OEWG would be needed. So if there is, what I understand Switzerland to be saying is that the role of the OEWG would depend on the frequency, which I think is something we've heard earlier from others. And I think Norway, you're supporting the idea that the frequency is the issue, not whether there should be an OEWG. So I'm going to move forward with that assumption. If I'm incorrect, Norway, please come back. Okay. Thank you, Norway.
A hand from Samantha Ross from the UK.
Perfect. Okay. Sam, may I ask you for your views, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Carissa and Nalini. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. We would like to once again thank the Secretariat for their work so far throughout these virtual discussions and for offering the discussion on this section of the text, as well as the concluding review of the sections we've previously discussed as a group. The UK believes with open-ended working groups that they could provide a mechanism for ensuring that decisions are made in between ICCMs. The Basel Convention is a good example of how OEWGs can be useful for progressing work, and we are supportive of this viewpoint. However, we would like to stress that throughout this pandemic, we've all had to adopt new virtual ways of working internationally. So we would like to propose that should we decide to have an OEWG, we think that we should embrace these new ways of working, and that OEWGs could potentially be virtual discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And of course, we will, I'm sure, have plenty of time in our virtual work groups to discuss the mechanisms and the details that would, of course, go along with an OEWG. Okay, so I think we do have a lot.
Sorry, one more hand, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We have Jean from the US. Jean, you're unmuted.
The United States agrees that the OEWG has a valuable role to play and should continue, subject to some of the points that have been made, some of the questions about parameters and working modes. We just would like to reiterate rather a point that the OEWG was actually established by ICCM in Resolution 2.6, and it was not included as part of the current SICOM instrument. So with that in mind, it's not clear to us that there is a need to include the OEWG in the text of the new instrument either. So for purposes of our mandate in this working group, we're not sure that we need to address the issue of the OEWG's work. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for your views on that. I'm going to go ahead and move on to, we do have a lot to cover today still, so I'm going to move on to our next issue, which is sort of what else your organization thinks might need to be included in a Section E. And so I'd like to put a few parameters on that conversation, given that we probably only have, I don't know, 20 minutes left, Nalini, maybe? Yes. So I want to go back to some assumptions and put a few assumptions in place. And those assumptions would be that the international conference, is, as Section A sort of now says, the body that would establish the subsidiary bodies, and that we recognize that Rule 23 in some form would provide the arrangements for how the international conference would do that, establish subsidiary bodies, and that we already talked about Rule 3 and participation and how some of those factors might need to be taken into account. And we have discussed sort of the role for an OEWG. So assuming those are in place, we'd like to hear what else your organization would like to see or thinks Section E should be used to do. And we're going to sort of do this like a lightning round. I want you to think of it a little bit as, I don't know, maybe some of you have done speed dating or something like that, to keep your interventions nice and quick so that we can basically make a list so that we can discuss or think further about those inputs that you would like to see in Section E. So Zuki, if I can take the South African submission or the Africa group submission as an example, I would say that the what else for Africa, in less than sort of a 1-minute clip that you're looking for, is the establishment of an independent, impartial, subsidiary scientific committee. So the African group, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, put forward a very thoughtful and detailed submission about what they wanted Section E to do, and that I'm sort of summarizing that in a quick sentence. And so I recognize that that submission goes well beyond the sentence that I just said in terms of scope and detail. But for the purposes of today, we're just looking for a very basic input on what your organization thinks that Section E would need to do, that it's missing outside of Section A, Rule 23, Rule 3, and the establishment of the OEWG. And I'm also going to include question 7 of our annotated agenda in this item, which went to, as our colleague from Cape Town noted earlier, went to the establishment of a scientific committee and how the role of science might play out in Section E. So if you will take a look at your notes on that, I'd like to open the floor to sort of short 1-minute exchanges on your views on what Section E should or should not, perhaps would also be relevant, do in addition to those 4 things.
Okay, so we have Felix Wettley from Switzerland who's asking for the floor. Felix, over to you.
Thank you very much. And on the question, what we see as an element in E, what those bodies should do, we think the important point is these issues of concern. What is already there on the A, if you would even go a bit to be more concrete. We think important issues of concern should be that such subsidiary body works also on the targets on the issues of concern, what we want to achieve there, what are indicators and milestones and the work plan. Thank you.
I think, Felix, you must have excelled at speed dating. That was that's exactly what we were looking for. Thank you very much for getting us started on the right foot.
Okay, I apologize. I saw somebody's hand up and then I actually pressed a button and it's gone. So if you hand again. Right. All right. In your unmute.
I can beat Felix, but I'll try to be quick. So we've heard the view of some that this section may not be necessary, actually, in light of other the rules of procedure and other sections, and we're open to that view, assuming that some important elements are captured elsewhere, as we've discussed. However, we do think that the instrument should establish somewhere in the text a network of experts to provide needed support for countries seeking scientific information to help inform their national efforts on chemicals management, as we've described in our previous submissions. Thank you.
Maybe another 10, 15 more seconds. Colleagues. Sector. Okay, I think Carissa.
Okay, so thank you very much. We will take that input into account as we sort of move forward and think a little bit about how we might sort of think about Section E. I do want to go back to our earlier intervention from our South African colleagues with respect to the participation question, and just ask if I can push a little bit further on that. I want to make sure that I summarize very briefly the African group's submission on a scientific body. But is there anything else that we would want to capture in terms of that scientific committee and its participation? I heard the intervention with respect to ensuring an element of impartiality to that, so I've already noted that. But if there's anything else, please feel free to let us know, and you could of course do that via written comment quickly if you need to. Okay, so with that, before we close, I would like to note that Japan, in its submission, raised the issue of the relationship between subsidiary bodies and ad hoc bodies. in particular by, Suki, if I read your submission correctly, noting that we don't need ad hoc bodies in the title of the section because of your view on the relationship between subsidiary and ad hoc bodies, but we could include them as a potential modality for work in section E. So this was note 6 on the agenda, and I'd like to just open the floor a little bit to hear views, and Canada had mentioned this also in its earlier chat about the relationship between subsidiary and ad hoc bodies, and perhaps Japan, since you raised the question in your submission, could I open with you if you're able?
Japan, I'm just trying to look for you, but if you could just put your hand up, it'll be easier for me to locate you. Okay, I think I've. There we go.
Can you hear? Yes.
Yes, go
Thank
ahead.
you very much for the floor. This is Suki from Japanese Ministry of Environment. Yes, so what we meant in our input was subsidiary bodies have ad hoc bodies within. So subsidiary bodies can overarch different kind of bodies. It we meant in the input. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are other views on sort of the relationship between subsidiary bodies and ad hoc bodies, or how you might see them working in the context of our new instrument, this would be a great time to sort of hear your views on that. And we can sort of use those views to move forward. Otherwise, we can certainly move on to our next and final question, which we are, of course, happy to do. Just noting perhaps before we move on, that I have a quick chat from Brazil, just noting that the support or the need supports the need to establish a structure that would allow for the facilitation of scientific and technical issues, and that there would be an opportunity to ensure that there are some rules about conflicts of interest, et cetera, as well as clear text in the section on issues of concern. So Brazil, duly noted. Thank you very much for that. Anyone? Okay. So that looks like
we have one more. Sorry, I beg your pardon. So, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Nalini. So I don't have a comment in terms of, the difference between ad hoc body and subsidiary body per se. But what I think would help the discussion in terms of clarifying those definitions is what kind of bodies we would like under the new instrument and what their purpose would be. And I mean, we have been talking about a scientific independent body, similar perhaps to the IPCC, which I think is very important and has a particular role. But then I think there could also be a need for a body that would be reviewing national reports and receiving information from focal points, engaging more with focal points within countries. So I think it's important to have a discussion of what type of bodies we want, and then whether that's subsidiary or ad hoc comes, I think, better into view in terms of defining those. Thank you.
Susan, you have the floor.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. We have the very same thought. Initially, we had a longer list of possible areas that we might want to consider having ad hoc bodies on periodically. I would also agree that there's some merit in having a bit of a conversation. If there are certain bodies that we think should be established more formally, be it OEWG, if we decide we need to do that, or have a little bit of clarity around ad hoc bodies and time-bound nature and work plans and that. Only in so much as I remember in Uruguay, there had been questions about sort of the status of the IP process as a group and whether or not it could mandate work to be done by the Secretariat and such things. That was in Uruguay at the very beginning. So there's some merit to having a bit of rules around these things and be clear then what the expectations around a mandate and how those would operate. Thank you.
Thank you, Nalini. If there aren't any other hands, I guess just maybe going back to Andreas and to Suzanne, like, are there specific issues that you would like to sort of put on the table, or specific examples? I think one of the things we were hoping to do in our previous sort of section was to see what functions you wanted Section E to do, such that we could then have a discussion about what bodies might do them. It sounds like perhaps you're a little bit interested in sort of talking about what bodies we might have to then see what functions they might do. I think obviously either way is good. But if you have particular things that you would like Section E to do and particular views on what kind of body that might be. I think the OEWG we've talked about, so I'd like to put, as we noted, put that aside for the moment. But in terms of other bodies, we have the suggestion for the sort of scientific committee with some notes in the chat box and some comments earlier about the need to have some sort of discussion about what kind of rules of procedure might go with, what kind of sort of conflict of interest or impartiality rules might be needed for that. We talked a little bit about sort of issues of concern and what kind of body might do that. And I think some of it goes to understanding what they would do. So maybe we can open the floor to sort of go back and merge the conversation that we just had with the conversation that we're having now. And you can let us know if there's anything else that you would want us to think about, and then we can sort of move forward from there. I look right now, we just have a quick chat before I give the floor, sorry to you, Nalini. We just have a quick chat from Japan that says as long as that the ICM has ICCM, or the International Conference, since we haven't, I guess, officially named it yet, has the authority to establish whatever bodies they want. They think that would be, Japan thinks it's enough for now, since we don't know, apart perhaps from the science policy interface, what we might want to be done.
We have from Jacqueline Alvarez from UNEC. Jacqueline, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think that there are so many elements that we are considering at the same time that it is hard to really say what is the difference between what we want of any ad hoc group, task force, subsidiary body, the role of the secretariat, what an open-ended working group will be needing. So for us, it's very confusing to really, advise or give some views on how things will need to be structured. So I guess that we also need to have that overall understanding of what the different roles and responsibilities of the different things will be. And I know this is the purpose of this group, but I guess that there are some kind of maybe overlaps in that as well, considering, for example, some of the roles that the Secretariat can be given the options that appeared in the issues of concern paper. There is a huge, I think, we are discussing in parallel a lot of elements, and for us it's very hard to see. So what Japan wrote some moments ago about maybe the need to have the ICCM, or to give the ICCM the authority to establish the bodies, is really what we need to think strongly. And the characteristics or how the other bodies might need to happen, we might consider to let the door be open for that in the instrument, but not maybe defining the nitty-gritties, because we might be entering into, you know, a chicken and egg situation somehow, and not giving the flexibility that might be needed, considering that this agenda will move forward very quickly as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure Japan was happy to hear your support for, for their general overall position. Thank you. Duly noted. There are indeed a lot of issues, and to be perfectly frank, I think as Tiraporn and I were looking through your submissions, it did become clear that there are a lot of issues, and that there was sort of a wide range of views on how to take those into account. So I think the purpose of today was to help us do exactly as you just suggested, which is to sort of get a sense for how you feel about some of the provisions that are already there, and what you think the gaps are in Section E. And of course, we did not expect, nor should you expect, to need to fill in all of the details today. We are, of course, going to come back to this, I suspect, many times, but given that there wasn't much to go on in Section E as currently drafted, today's discussion has been very, very helpful for us to get a sense of how you're all feeling. And I think I can't speak for Chirapan because I can't see her, but I think we are quite pleased with the fact that there did seem to be a lot of agreement in our discussion today about things that are important, and perhaps some areas where you'd like to see some further development. We'll try to provide that for you, keeping in mind that we won't be able to, of course, answer all the questions before we get to the actual implementation of our new instrument or our new framework. So with that, do you have anyone else on your list, Nalini?
No, I don't have anyone asking. Oh, we have Susan. Susan, you have the floor. Suzanne,
Yes,
sorry, Suzanne.
No worries. Sorry for intervening again. Just wanted to flag that we very much agree with others who have said that, form follows function, and that we probably will want to have a bit of a more conversation around the areas of activity that we might want to pursue, because then after that might facilitate how we draft this. And also, just to remind people, flag a little bit without being too repetitive in our input to this topic earlier. And as per previous conversations that we've had in this venue, a function on horizon scanning, foresight, early warning, sort of support, sort of future GCO-like process is clearly something as a group that we're going to need. And that could be something that is a subsidiary body, as well as, work that is, I don't know if it is needed to be part officially of a subsidiary body, because we've created them anyhow through rules of procedure, but how do we address the issues of concern? And then could there be some need at some point for monitoring and supporting assessments for stock taking, which we're going to get to soon, maybe potentially working and refining and developing the indicators over time. So those are just areas that clearly will need some additional work and could be a function of a subsidiary body. Thank you.
I have next Jean on my list. You have the floor.
The United States also would like to support Japan's very important point, setting aside our earlier suggestion that there should be some kind of discussion in the Beyond 2020 instrument of a network of experts, which is perhaps a little different from a subsidiary body per se. The United States believes that ICCM already has authority to establish subsidiary bodies, which could be ad hoc. And that is the important point, really. If the ICCM decides to establish such a group, it can develop the group's mandate at that time, taking into account the specific challenge that the group is expected to address, which of course we are probably not able to predict perfectly at this moment in time. Thanks.
Okay, so I think, Carissa, we don't have any more hands up, so I wonder if we should move on now, because it's already at 2:15.
Okay, so we have expired our hour.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think that actually is perfect because my last talking point was to thank everybody for their efforts. We did have a note on number 9 on our agenda that there were a number of submissions that included suggestions for sort of review or additions to paragraph 2 of the existing compilation text under section A. And those are listed as points A through E. And so we did see, I just want to sort of note that we did note that number of you had made those kinds of suggestions, and that as Tirupon and I think back upon our conversation today and upon your submissions, we will duly note that suggestion. And as Canada just noted, they had used section E to add some, they had used paragraph 2, sections A through E, to add some some of their suggestions. And so we will certainly look at that as well as any of the other submissions we received with respect to paragraph 2. So if that's all, thank you very much. I think we've done a pretty good job of keeping to our schedule. And now I'd like to turn the chair over to Tirupon to begin our presentation on the outcome of your additional submissions with respect to section D.
Thank you, Carissa. Now I would like to draw your attention to section D, enhance sectoral and stakeholder engagement. Alex, could you thank you. With our cooperative spirit and desire to make the work progress at IP4 up on the request from Bureau and the IP co-chairs, today I am going to present the outcome of the electronic input received by December 11th for the paragraph that we were open for comments, and the one where we propose possible path forward in the identified paragraph. As a reminder, our instructions were that if you agree or were willing to agree with the co-facilitator proposal, you were asked not to comment. So today we will only be addressed the paragraph where we receive concerns. I would like to thank you for your thoughtful review of our suggestions and for the many of you that were able to agree to them. Next slide, please. Paragraph 1 and 2 were not open for comment because we already addressed this paragraph at the third meeting on November 19, and that will not be addressed today. Next, please. On paragraph 3, there were 2 comments that we received. That 2 comments were not ready to accept our proposal on this paragraph. I can propose to use the word term agreements instead of either the original term conventions or our proposed term arrangement. EU proposed to use the original term conventions and remove its brackets, as well as also proposed to use the term are involved to instead of the word should. Therefore, since there is no agreement on this paragraph, so we will keep the original term convention in brackets. This is the result of paragraph 3. Next, please.
Thereupon, there's a hand up from Gap Jilhana.
All right. Could you go back? Yes. Okay. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tirupon. I won't be long, but wouldn't it help this process if other words have been put in to show them as well in the next iteration? Because otherwise, if we just put conventions there and other words have been suggested, we're not showing the fruit of our labours. So could it be helpful to put conventions slash arrangements in a bracket there? In fact, legally speaking, arrangements are covered by bodies and processes, and the distinction here is the fact that you're talking about legally binding conventions. And when GAP made its original proposals for this, we did note that using should in the second line is not usual. We normally invite other processes that have other governing bodies. So I don't know whether that sounds as though the EU was also calling for that. And I think it would be useful to put that as an alternative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your suggestion. So any other comment on this paragraph?
No, no other.
Okay, I will move on to the next paragraph on the paragraph 4. Could you, Alex, could you please go to the next slide, please? Yes. On paragraph 4, our proposal is to delete, we will leave the first bracket, and we propose to delete the an essential element and a contribution on the last sentence, but only a group of NGOs still prefer an essential element to be retained and propose to remove its brackets. So we will leave the brackets as they were, but at the bureau meeting, the co-chair knows that if we have a situation where there is a loss of agreement, but maybe just one or two stakeholders are not able to agree, we should footnote such disagreement. So that what we will do in our summary of this meeting as the suggestion from the bureau. Next, please. Paragraph 5 and 6 were not open for comments as well. However, I will explain about paragraph 5 later when at the end, after we go to all of paragraph of section D. Next, please. On paragraph 7, our proposal is to remove the bracket and draft a footnote. There was one comment from IPEN on this paragraph that was not ready to support our proposal and proposed to release such page. Like we did earlier in the last paragraph, we will therefore leave the brackets as they were. And for further discussion, since there was only one stakeholder who disagreed, but we will follow the recommendation from the bureau meeting and put a footnote to note that such disagreement. Next, please. On the 8, 9, and 10 were not open for comments as well. So go to the paragraph 11. On 11, we reached agreement on 11. We would like to note our appreciation for the acceptance of the text within the brackets from all stakeholders. And I would just remind you to note that we have a question from GAP regarding whether this paragraph duplicate element in part 5, section A on the ICCM and section G on taking stock of progress. So section A, we are of the view that the answer is likely to be yes. And on section G, the answer is less clear. So we will include a footnote noting that IP4 may want to revisit this section to determine whether it is duplicative of section A or G. That's all for this paragraph. And then go to the paragraph 12. Next, please. Yes. This paragraph is quite complicated, but I will try to walk you through each of brackets in this paragraph. The first two we were not open for comment. We will go to the brackets that we open for comment. The first of the 5 brackets on the and timeless. Our proposal is to delete it and draft a footnote to remind that section D would not be reviewed at the end together with the vision statement to verify the significance or timeliness. But there were 2 comments on this bracket, one from IPEN and another one from EU, that were not ready to accept our proposal and prefer it to be retained. But I think maybe there might be a better way to make sure we can remember to see if the vision state is good. Maybe EU and IPEN can think about that and make a suggestion on this. For the second to fourth bracket, taking into account any engagement and endorse and formally recognize, we propose to remove the brackets allow taking into, could you please go further to the next slide, please? Alex, could you please go further for the next slide, please? The next another one, please. Yes. Our proposal is to remove brackets allow the taking into account any engagement and delete the less and endorse and formal recognize will be deleted. And we propose and so we are going to leave the because there was comments that proposed to delete the term taking into account any engagement and retain the less. So we are going to leave the bracket like they were because we cannot reach agreement on our proposal. And go to the next slide, please. The last bracket. The last bracket is to secure the necessary ownership. We propose to delete it, but there was one comment from IPEN which prefer it to be retained without bracket. Like we did earlier, we will therefore leave the bracket for further discussion since there was one stakeholder who disagreed. And we will follow the recommendation from the Bureau that we will put a footnote to note that this agreement on this bracket. Next is the paragraph 13. Yes, paragraph 13. On the, I think I see one hand, Nalini.
We have Housekeeping. Have the floor. Could you just provide your organization name and as well when you start?
Yes, thanks, Nalini. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm Housekeeping Grace from the ILO, but I'm making this intervention on behalf of the IOMC as this deals specifically with the coordination with IOMC. And the IOMC has taken time to discuss among its participating organizations this paragraph 13, which is very important for us. And we have proposed an alternative text that we have submitted and is available on the website. And I'm not sure if you're going to show that text, but if not, I would like to read it.
We are not going to show your text, but we're gonna mention about it. Can you allow me to finish my presentation first, and after that, if you would like to propose your text, I will allow you to do so. Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. On this paragraph, because on our third meeting that we review this section, we will request for the first submission on this section. We got the proposal from Canada to revise the text, and this proposal is on the screen to improve sectoral cooperation and coordination on the sound management of chemicals and waste. The IOMC should promote broad participation and coordination of policy and activity of relevant intergovernmental bodies and their members to contribute to the achievement of the Beyond 2020 framework. This is our proposal after we got the proposal from the Canada, and we had hoped that this proposal would be acceptable to all. However, it is clear that there are differing views on this one, and therefore we are going to leave it as it was. But would add that Canada and IOMC, I know you propose the text. Maybe this is the time that you can present your proposal, and I will finish my presentation later.
Okay, Hauska, you're unmuted now.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the IOMC would like to propose, as I mentioned, an alternative text for this paragraph 13. And if you would allow me, I can read it. We would like this to read, to contribute actively to the implementation of the Beyond 2020 framework, the IOMC should continue to promote broad engagement and coordination of the policies, work programs, and the activities of relevant intergovernmental organizations, further strengthening international cooperation and multi-sectoral engagement in the sound management of chemicals and waste. So this is something that we were able to agree on between our participating organizations, and therefore we found it important to share it with you all today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your proposal. But however, because we cannot reach agreement as from now, and we cannot see the path forward on this paragraph. So I think we should leave it, because after consulting with Carissa and I would like to retain the original text in bracket, and we would like to request Canada and IOMC that your proposed text be sure to keep in your personal parking lot for when this section is reviewed at IP4 for further consideration of your views. And in other words, it is not that your suggestion were carefully considered by your colleagues and fully discussed and then not accepted. It is simple that given the lengthy negotiation at IP3 on section D, the purpose of this round of review was to see if we can make progress on the remaining brackets. It is clear that this paragraph needs more than what we are able to do today, and so the bracket will remain at, and your suggestion can be retabled at IP4. This is acceptable for you? Okay, I see Caroline hand. Can you unmute her?
Yes, thank you very much. It's Carolyn Vickers from the World Health Organization. We're wondering, given the progress that's been made on this paragraph, if the alternative proposals could be included in the documentation that comes out of this virtual working group. mindful of the fact that at the open-ended working group, paragraph 13 was in any case a placeholder subject to further discussions between the proponents, which was the EU and the IOMC. So it would be great if we could have some more visibility on the proposal that would help us in the future discussions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your point. Carissa, do you want to?
Sure. I think if and this may go a little bit also to Gap's earlier intervention, which I think is, we do a summary of the meetings and those do get posted. And so, we had been, I think, pretty strict in terms of this particular section, given where we did end up at IP3. But yes, I think the answer to your question, Carolyn, is if in the summary of the meeting, if we can make sure that it's clear that there was a proposal, and then as Tirapon noted, it's a timing question for today with respect to how we can get through everything, but that we do, of course, there are remaining brackets in a number of the sections. This paragraph is in brackets, and we'd be happy to include that there was a proposal for further discussion in our meeting summary.
All right. I think you are happy now. I think she's happy now. Okay, all right. I will now this the last paragraph that I would like to cover, but now I would like to go back to the paragraph 5. Next slide, please, Alex. On this paragraph that we come up with the proposal, the recommendation from us is to delete this paragraph in its entirety, given both its duplicative nature and the lack of agreement expressed by the stakeholder submissions. However, there was not full agreement within the comment of our proposal, so we will move on with the brackets as they were for further discussion in IP4. It means all of the text of paragraph 5 will be changed with the bracket in, and this defer to the IP4 for further consideration. Last but not least, that I would like to mention in my part, we also received the input from WHO, ILO, and FLO that aims to address a gap in the sectoral engagement perspective. Back in November, WHO, ILO, and FAO submitted a proposal to fill what it has identified at IP3 as a gap in multi-sectoral representation. There was a discussion on that gap, that they would like the virtual working group to consider, if possible, the text that have been proposed reads as follows. In light of the multi-sectoral character of SICAM and in accordance with Rule 15, paragraph 5 of Rule of Procedure, ICCM President shall invite the Bureau one government representative invited to the one government representative from each of agriculture, labor, and health sectors. FAO, ILO, and WHO shall be invited to facilitate nomination of the representatives. This is the proposal made by WHO, ILO, and FAO. They should we as co-facilitator think it fits better in section A on the institutional arrangement issue, but are going to put it in the parking lot document with the other proposal for further consideration and feedback from virtual working group at another meeting. We appreciate the effort of ILO, WHO, and FAO to help us meet our mandate and look forward to discuss this further when we turn back to all of the issue in the parking lot. Okay, this all for my part. In conclusion, it seems that for this section D, we are unable to make much more progress than we expected. The remaining bracket text will be deferred to IP4 for further consideration. Thank you very much for your attention. Now, I would like to turn back to Nalini to move to the next agenda item, in which I see Switzerland hand. Can you unmute him?
Thank you very much, Sarah Pound. Just a brief comment on
All right.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much, co-facilitator Terapon, for this going through. I think just on para 5, I think we can see all the different suggestions also now from IOMC and so on. We would not be comfortable deleting it. I think it's quite an important idea behind this endorsement or support or adoption by other intergovernmental bodies of this framework. So it really reflects sectorial and multi-stakeholder engagement. So at this stage, I would suggest to keep this text, or at least provide this text and other texts that could then replace them that we can see them together. Because I would fear that we lose these ideas, and I think it's one of the key elements to endorse the new framework really by multi-stakeholder, multi-sectorally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, paragraph 5 will be retained as it were, because we cannot reach agreement on this paragraph that our proposal to be it, but many submission that did not agree with us. Okay, so it will be retained as it was. And I think now I would like to close this session and back to Nalini for further next agenda items, which I'm looking forward to hear from the government of Japan on their approach on section G and H. Nalini, you can have the floor.
Okay, Terapon, we actually have a hand up from Vasilios from the EU and member states. Can I turn to Vasilios first before we move on?
Sure, definitely.
Thank you very much, Terapon. Thank you very much, Nalini. Indeed, this is my third effort. I raised my hand, and I'm very glad that you recorded this. Very short, I just wanted to first to say I'm not exactly sure what is the process on this section right now, but it seems that we will move to the next one in a minute. Anyway, I don't want to repeat what we have already submitted, respecting your suggestions and proposals on the process in advance of the meeting. However, I would like to support what was suggested by Caroline and the IOMC for capturing their proposal or flagging it in the further discussion. We think that would be important indeed. And finally, I would also like to echo and support what was just said by my colleague Felix on deletion of para 5. We are as well not very comfortable with deleting this at this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All of your comment will be noted. And now we can move to the next session.
Next on my list, I have
Thank you very much, Nalini. I don't know what's happening. It's really hard to know whether one's flag is up or down, and I've actually had it up since paragraph 13. I'm sorry if I'm doing the wrong thing. I wanted to, it's a related comment on paragraph 5 and paragraph 13, and I wanted to support Switzerland and the EU about the need to make sure that the different elements are captured in 5 and 13, and therefore the reason not to get take them away at the moment. But my point, the reason why I've chosen to intervene and not just write in the chat, is that in paragraph 13, it's a completely normative statement. It just says the IOMC, in any version, the IOMC organization should do something. Fine. We can all agree that motherhood and apple pie are very good things, but it isn't action. If it's to become action, the IOMC organizations need to be invited to do something so that their governing bodies consider it. And that, I think it's really important to look at all the shoulds in these texts, because if you don't address the governing bodies who decide on the resources for what IOMC member organizations do, then you cannot be sure that the IOMC member organizations will have the staff that we need to work on our elements. So I would be grateful when comparing those texts in the summary of the meeting, you would also include a point that I have made out in full in the chat, that you do need to consider whether you're making a normative statement, should, or you are looking to have some action, in which case you need something like invites. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to you. Actually, the paragraph, what is mine? Actually, the paragraph 13 will be retained as it was as well, because we cannot reach agreement to replace it with the proposal made by Canada and co-facilitators. And so we retain it at the original text. And all of the proposal that made on the paragraph 13 will be noted in our summary when we finish our work on this virtual working group. I think it is clear by Carissa mentioned before. Thank you very much. Do we still have a hand raised, Nalini?
Okay, so we move on then, Terrapon?
Okay, all right.
No more hands, and just in the chat, there's no one asking to go on this issue. Okay, so we'll now, as Terrapon mentioned, we'll move on to the next agenda item, explanation by the government plan on its suggested approach to sections G and H. As you recall, that this was planned for the 4th virtual meeting that was held earlier this month on the 3rd of December, but we ran out of time. So please do refer to the Japanese submission under stakeholder input, electronic feedback sections G, H, and it's dated 15th November 2020. So I hope you can manage to find it on the website. So I'll just repeat that. So it's the Japanese submission under stakeholder input tab, and it's under the section called electronic feedback sections G, H, dated 15th November 2020. I now hand over to Carissa to take us through the session. Thank you. Carissa, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think actually you probably covered most of what I was about to say, which as in the preparations for our earlier conversation on G and H, Japan had made a proposal that was separate. It showed up in our sort of big ideas section of the agenda, and we had agreed to offer them some additional time in that meeting to provide their explanation. And then unfortunately, we didn't have time to go back to that. So it is on the agenda for today. As Nalini noted, what you're now seeing on your screen is available on the website. And our intention for this agenda item is to give the floor to Japan to explain its views and its thoughts. Maybe allow a very, very short amount of time if there are any very specific particular questions and then otherwise to leave it on the website available for your consideration over the next couple of weeks. And then we would imagine that when we come back to section G again in mid-January, I'm not doing the calendar in front of me, that we would then have an opportunity for you to ask further questions or to consider the proposal from Japan. So with that, Suki, if I could turn it over to you. I think you can see up on the screen that your slide is here, and we welcome your quick explanation of G and H. Thank you so much.
Okay, if I can ask, if you can raise your hand, so that might help find you. Otherwise, I have to scroll up and down. All right, thank you.
Very much, Secretariat Facilitator. This is Suki from Japanese Ministry of Environment. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear colleagues. Our idea is first left in a big idea when we are talking about the section G. But I think our proposal is very different from the current text. I believe that we are given some time by the co-facilitator, so we appreciate that. And our proposal is for the section G, taking stock of progress, so not section H, by the way. So we are going to present. So the purpose of taking stock of progress is to progress against the objectives and the targets, which we have reached the general agreement within this virtual working group the other day. With the current text, the way to do it is based on the reporting. The Secretariat is expected to compile such reporting. Also, designing an agreed reporting format for all the stakeholders is expected, which will be a difficult task to accommodate all the stakeholders' data and information. We echo some of the concerns expressed by stakeholders' input about duplicative reporting effort in relevant agreements and initiatives. In addition to using reporting, we need to consider a review process. The text suggests that each country to be reviewed periodically by a review committee. Japan emphasizes the importance of reducing burden for stakeholders when taking stock progress. In the same time, including all the stakeholders' data and information and ensuring a concrete review process are definitely necessary for the Beyond 2020 instrument. Therefore, we would like to propose our idea on taking stock of progress. Our idea is presented PowerPoint presentation that includes process monitoring and impact assessment. So this green box is the process monitoring, and the process monitoring is to monitor the degree of achievement on process indicators. Monitoring them in submission of the reports by countries, Japan suggests conducting the online survey for all stakeholders and presenting the results in the form of dashboard to be able to oversee the progress on process indicators promptly. We should use the power of IoT for better monitoring process. Some of you may know the target dashboard towards IG biodiversity target as described on the left bottom of the presentation. We have this type of dashboard in our mind. The process indicators should be chosen accordingly to be able to see in the dashboard promptly. Then the reporting of the individual indicators by stakeholders will not be necessary. We foresee frequent update of the process monitoring, such as annually, as it is simple. We suggest the Secretariat to be the custodian of this process, but all the Secretariat has to do is maintain the website accordingly. Next, the red one is impact assessment. This is to assess the progress on impact indicators. We think that the way to do it is to designate custodian per indicators, such as IOMC organizations, to assess the progress within their responsibility. We should note that Sustainable Development Goals indicators also have custodian agencies. Not familiar with the process, and we are open to suggestions from who's familiar with SDGs custodians' roles. IOMC may need to request periodic updates to stakeholders. So since we believe the impact indicators tends to need longer term to be assessed, frequency of this assessment can be every 5 years or 10 years. Finally, in order to evaluate the progress, target, strategic objectives, and vision, Japan proposes international conference requests a third party to undertake overall evaluation, as it has been done so within the current cycle, to minimize burden for the Beyond 2020 instrument while ensuring the equitability of the evaluation. We would like to remind stakeholders of the independent evaluation report between 2006 and 2015 was completed with literature review, online survey, focus group discussion, and interviews, and without periodic reporting by stakeholders. But we can include the outcome of taking stock of progress for in the overall evaluation for the new instruments. This way, we think that we can achieve the effective taking stock of progress with all stakeholders involved without adding burden to all. So we are open for the question, or maybe we can't really answer the question, but we are open for the suggestion. Thank you very much.
Maybe I can just clarify as well, Carissa. So submission by Japan is actually narrative in a PDF document, and we will upload the graphic side by side, but it might take another few minutes. So apologies about that.
Great, thank you so much. So as I noted, we would perhaps we have a few minutes to open the floor. If there are any immediate questions for Japan, I think I can perhaps speak for all of us in this working group, Japan, to thank you for your thoughts and your willingness to share your proposal with us on sections G and H. It's much appreciated, especially the graphics. Those are always fun to have and certainly helpful. So if there are any immediate quick questions for Japan, why don't we ask you to raise your hands now, or let's not do the chat. Well, we could do the chat box if you need to, but making it a little bit easier on the Secretariat to identify you perhaps in the hands raising function. And if we don't have any, then we can move forward with section G, and of course we will, as I noted, come back to this proposal with further discussion at a later session. Okay, so again, thank you, Suki and Japan. We appreciate your efforts this morning very much. So with that, I think we are prepared to turn to our final agenda item, which is agenda item G on reporting or mechanisms for taking stock of progress. So last time we only got through 2 substantive paragraphs, paragraphs 1 and paragraph 2, although we did discuss and move around and consolidate the other paragraphs to facilitate our discussion. So we are going to start today where we left off, and we are going to try to get through the remaining paragraphs in our proposal that we prepared for our meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago now. I've lost a little bit track of time. And we will, excuse me, and we will look at those paragraphs in the order that we listed them on the agenda that was published for this meeting. So we will be starting with paragraph 3, and then we will move to 5 and 5 bis, followed by 7 and 8, 6, 12A, 12C, 13 and 14, which we will take together, and 3 bis. I suspect that is a slightly ambitious agenda, but we are going to try. And so again, we would ask you As we did last time, we're going to, we produced all the documents in advance of the last meeting, and we are going to use those same documents today. So we would ask you to make sure that you have your compilation text out because of the nature of our proposal. It was a red line strikeout didn't really work very well of the existing paragraphs. So if you could please have your compilation text ready. I assume you have looked at the co-facilitators proposals that were presented in the agenda. And of course, if you took any notes from your own comments in preparation for last session, we would want you to have those with you. So with that, Alexandra, if you could sort of move forward into the next slide. I believe what you will see in front of you is paragraph 3. So as I noted last time, we completed our review of paragraphs 1 and 2 of our co-facilitators proposal. Paragraph 1 related to sort of what we were calling the goal for reporting, and paragraph 2 was more on the what should be reported to the Secretariat. And now we are looking at paragraph 3, as well as its footnote 3, which does not appear on the text in front of you, but is, of course, in our co-facilitators proposal, which is more of the focus of the report than what it should be. So your submissions to this paragraph placed a heavy emphasis, in particular, on public availability. So you'll notice that the second sentence is really quite heavy on that idea of sort of what would be publicly available and what that public availability would facilitate. So looking at paragraph 3, this addresses the express need for the information to be focused so that the international conference can provide its necessary assessment, including with respect to any gaps. Again, gaps was something that was mentioned significantly in your contributions, and again, the heavy focus on the availability of information. So I would also call your attention, as I noted, to footnote 3, which talks about section A and making sure that the international conference is tasked with evaluating and reporting on the implementation of programs that are fulfilling the vision with a view to reviewing progress. So again, we spent a lot of time last time talking about the link between what the international conference would do and what the reporting should do. So I'd like not to open that up again and to go back to that. But I do want to just note that we did have a discussion about that and hope that your notes are reflective of that already. So with that, I would like to open paragraph 3. I would like to start with sentence 1, which also includes, I believe, footnote 3, which is not actually showing up on the text. I'm sorry about that. That's probably my fault. Footnote 3 goes after international conference. Sentence 1 talks about the information provided should focus on efforts to implement the agreed strategic objectives and targets, taking into account the indicators and milestones to allow the international conference to assess the progress in fulfilling the vision in a comprehensive manner. So I'd like to open that sentence for brief comments. Again, I'd like to go back to Nalini's initial opening today, which is we do have a lot to cover. And so to the extent that you don't have any comments, we obviously appreciate that. We do not need to take time to support the co-facilitators proposals. We appreciate that as a matter of course and as in your general nature. So if you could please offer your comments on sentence 1 if you have any concern, and please keep your interventions quite short in the interest of time. Thank you so much. Nalini, I'll go ahead and open the floor and turn to you for the order of speakers. Thank you.
Maybe another 10 more seconds, because whenever I say, okay, we can move on, and then there's always a hand that raises. So to avoid that, let's just give another 10 more seconds.
Sure.
Okay.
Great, thank you so much. So moving on to, and I think actually there were a lot of very good comments on that sentence, and so I'm glad that that worked. So sentence 2 is about, as I noted, this sort of the public availability, and that the stakeholder data and information should be available, be able to be shared, to allow this sort of comprehensive, and I believe that it is Brazil in your submission with respect to this section. You noted the importance of this review sort of being a cooperative effort. And so we thought that that was a very good sentiment and important to try to capture in some way in this paragraph of the overall progress in achieving the vision, strategic objectives, and targets, as well as to propose recommendations to address any identified gaps, which of course is very important in the idea of taking stock of progress. So with that, I would like to go ahead and open the discussion on sentence 2 of paragraph 3. And again, I think this is now our standard process. I would just note that if you're comfortable with sentence 2, please do not feel the need to intervene. Thank you so much.
Okay, doesn't seem like there's anyone asking for the floor. Another
Great. Good. Again, I think there were some good comments on this particular paragraph. So thank you very much for that. It's an excellent way. Oh, did you speak too soon?
I did.
I can't tell you how disappointed I am.
Okay, Vasilios from the
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I'm very sorry to ask for a clarification. I'm usually not one of the colleagues who raise procedural questions, but I think I really need to understand the exact purpose of this exercise. You pointed out rightly that there is a link to other sections in the institutional arrangements. And we have addressed this. And as you said rightly, we had a discussion, a large discussion last time. Now, I would like to have a clarification on what is your understanding of how this discussion here will be connected at the end of this discussion or this group with the institutional arrangements, given the fact that there is an obvious overlap between this text here under section G with the institutional arrangements and the functions addressed there. I'm not very clear on this, and would be glad to understand this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vasilios. Yes, that's actually a good point to raise. So, and we did talk about it last time, but I think you're right. I should have started with that. So my apologies. So I think, like everything else, there in the text that did not get a lot of attention at IP3, there is a lot of overlap between sections, mostly section A, but I think also with some of the other sections, and section G in particular. We did try at the beginning of our last session, or for much of our last session, to try to put those overlaps at least together in the same paragraphs for this section. But we noted, and I'm forgetting which footnote it is, so forgive me, but noting that there will absolutely need to be a review that would look at the consistency and the redundancy between section A in particular and section G. And I think we added a couple of footnotes as we went along to that effect. So for right now, I think we are trying to capture the language that we would want, and then we will need to go back. And I think that probably comes a little bit later. I don't really have the answer to that. Perhaps David, if you're still on and available, I'm not sure if the Bureau or if you and Judith have had a chance to think about how that sort of consistency review happens. But I think our interest is making sure that making sure that what you are interested in seeing, be it in Section A or in Section G, is captured. And then the overall process, including, I believe, all of you as stakeholders, would make sure that it's not duplicative in both places. But I don't know if we have a defined process for when that might happen. But it will happen. I feel confident about that. And then I see from Alexandra that we have a question about, does the term stakeholder include governments? In other parts it says governments and stakeholders, and sometimes it says only stakeholders. Yes, so we did take this from the submissions, but it would be my assumption that in this particular paragraph, that yes, it would include governments. So, and also just noting in the chat box, thank you, Vasilius, duly noted.
Okay, I will a hand from Samantha Ross from the UK.
Thank you. Perhaps maybe just Sam, before we go to you, I will put a note in my own text to look carefully at that stakeholder question and to make sure that it's clear. So thank you for the chat, Alexandra.
Thank you, Carissa. Thank you, Nalini. I just wanted to raise or remind the co-facilitators that the UK stated in the 3rd of December virtual working group a proposal that the co-facilitators republish the new version of this document with the proposed amendments included to Section G and H, within a week or so potentially for stakeholders to consider the changes fully and submit a written response. I appreciate some time has gone now since you have made these amendments. However, I have not seen an official request for written responses from stakeholders as yet. So I think this would be helpful, and I suspect the silence of stakeholders on this point may be related to some confusion on the process for agreeing this text. Thank you.
Is that our order of speakers, Nalini? Okay, thank you. So I think just to go to that, yes, to be honest, there's really only so many hours in the day that one can do. And so I think we felt that we had offered a pretty comprehensive document about sort of what we were suggesting, et cetera. So I apologize for not really being able to do the red line that you did ask for. And I did note and recall that you had done that. I just did not, we didn't have enough hours in the day to try to do that. So we are going to quickly, I think by the end of January, run out of time. And so we'll have to see if we're going to have a chance to come back and run another electronic input opportunity. But we will certainly, I did take note and understand the request, and we'll do our best over the course of the next 3 weeks or so to try to meet that. And I think we are, these submissions come in from the electronic input, and it does take a tremendous amount of work to read them all and to put all of the comments and the submissions together and to try to make sure that they capture to the greatest extent possible and to the extent that we understand them, the views. And so it is difficult, but I think there has to be some mechanism for pulling those things together, and there's only so many hours in the day that we can produce additional documents. So we had planned in our agreed schedule to provide a co-facilitator's proposal, which is, I think, what we thought that we did based on the input. And well, again, I duly noted and understand that perhaps, would maybe have been the ideal, but it's hard to go back and sort of redo documents that have already been produced, because they do take a significant amount of time to look at everything. So we hope that you have been able to use the last couple of weeks to look over what's here, and we certainly are appreciative of the time that you all put in as well. So thank you, duly noted, and we will do our best. Thank you. Okay, I did see quickly come across my chat from David, just a quick note that says, for the moment, they do, with respect to sort of Vasilios, is your question, they have not agreed within the Bureau yet on a defined process to address issues that are either best placed in certain sections or duplication. And David did have to leave to go to another meeting, but we will certainly keep that footnote that we originally had. I will go back and find that and make sure that it stays in there. So with that, do we have further comments, or could we move on to paragraph 5? Okay, let's move forward to paragraph 5. We're going to look at paragraph 5 and 5 bis together. We did talk about this paragraph a little bit at our earlier meeting, but of course we were looking at paragraphs 1 and 2. So in the context of paragraph 5, you will see that in the first part, it's a one-sentence compilation, and the first part had talked about data and information from stakeholders should be compiled, analyzed, and reports developed by the Secretariat. If you look back at the paragraph that we just looked at in paragraph 3, but also in paragraph 2, in our view, that's already been laid out in our earlier paragraphs and therefore was duplicative, and tabled to the international conference. Of course, the reports for taking progress do move forward to the international conference, and so that also seems duplicative of our earlier paragraphs. However, the part that was new that was raised in your submissions was the idea that there would be a panel or a body of experts. And of course, we just talked about subsidiary and ad hoc bodies or expert groups, but that this panel or body of experts would be designed to help the Secretariat compile and analyze the reports. So this was a new idea, and I'm sorry, I now don't have in my notes whose idea it was, so I will apologize in advance to that. So I would like to just note that for a number of your submissions, it talked about the importance for there to be a process where the reporting was processed. And so I think the question for you is whether you believe that there would need to be a panel or a body of experts that would assist the Secretariat in its review of the reports or efforts to take stock of progress. So with respect to that very narrow question, I think we'd like to open discussion about whether there's a sense that that panel or body of experts is needed, in particular, not to review the progress, but in particular to compare and analyze the reports that are going to be developed by the Secretariat. And so Nalini, if we could give a few seconds and then sort of open the floor on that. Thank you.
We have
Thank you very much, Carissa, for the question. It surely depends very much on how big the Secretariat is going to be, and whether it has the capacities to make the reports, to compile the reports itself. Because however much a panel of experts might help, there is a big danger that it becomes a pre-negotiation, and trying to make sure that it's fully independent and not biased in any way could be very difficult. So from our point of view, it might be better to have enough staff in the Secretariat to do this job properly, perhaps with the help of the IOMC organisations, than to try and create an expert group and run the risk of pre-negotiation. Thank you.
Next, I have Andrea Rother from West of Cape Town. Andrea, you have the floor.
Thanks, Nalini. So I really am very cognizant and really do not want to create any extra work. But I think what I'm sort of feeling is that we shouldn't have a lot of extra bodies, subsidiary bodies, but we do need to have clear bodies with clear roles. And we've, Japan had a nice idea of how to use a dashboard. There have been examples of, a scientific committee that would have a particular role. So I feel like it would really help if there was concrete proposals on the table of bodies and what these bodies would look like, and so that the discussions can be informed in terms of the way forward. I mean, I've written down 5 suggestions of different bodies just in the discussion we've had today, and this isn't taking into account all the other documents. So I think it would be really worthwhile to keep it to maybe 2, and what would their roles be, and how would they be formed. So that's just a suggestion to try and kind of move forward, simplify things, but recognizing the need that we probably do have to have some subsidiary or other bodies. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, those seem to be, I think, reasonably at least similar in their end game comments. So we appreciate that. If there's no other comments on 5, then I think we'd like to move to 5 bis. So 5 bis was actually something that had a. Jacqueline, do you have something you'd like to add on 5? Sorry, it's hard for me to follow the chat and the hand. So if you would like the floor, Nalini, I think that perhaps Jacqueline wants to intervene. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Jacqueline, if you could please put your hand up, it might be easier. But I have first Jean from the US. I'll give the floor to you.
And thanks to the co-facilitators for the efforts to streamline text here. We appreciate that. But picking up on the intervention from GAP, it's not really clear to us why we would need a panel or a body of experts to collect reports. This really does seem like a core function of the Secretariat that could be handled through the budget. And if additional resources were needed, we would handle that through the program of work and budget. Thanks so much.
Okay, I've unmuted Jacqueline. Jacqueline, could you try?
Yes, thank you so much. And sorry for causing confusion. I guess it's too many hours here. I really feel sorry for you. No, what we wanted to, in a way, highlight is the level of granularity that we might need in the instrument as such. And maybe following what Japan was saying before, if we have the big titles on this, allowing the creation of body of experts, of subsidiary bodies or other things, if we really need to include that language in a text that will be with us for decades, maybe at least 1 decade, it is just a question on that, right? Maybe on the level of granularity that might be required to show a political message, to show a way forward, or why are we going into this level of details? It's just a question in general for all the subsidiary bodies considerations, included open-ended. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think that, to be honest, that is exactly why we put this in here, given that what we tried to do was to take the submissions and the ideas that came out in the submissions and find the right place in the text where we could have a discussion about some of the ideas that were raised in the submission. So this was an idea that was raised in someone's submission. And again, I'm sorry, I can't remember whose idea it was at this point, several weeks later. I think that what we're hearing is support for the point perhaps that you exactly just raised, Jacqueline, which is there may be, this is a level of granularity or that too much detail for this kind of text. And so thank you. I think that's supportive of a number of the other comments that we've heard, and duly noted as well that there are some support from Japan and a few others also in the chat box on that exact point. So thank you very much. And maybe Felix, I'm just going to answer your question super quickly. So 3 bis, when we opened this conversation several weeks ago, we moved 3 bis to the end of the discussion and consolidated all of the proposals for that specific review process to be to put in 3 bis. And so if you look in the agenda, you'll see the order of the paragraphs that we're going to address, and 3 bis is at the end, which is where we put it after our last discussion. Okay, I'd like to go back now to 5 bis. I think, are we ready to do that, Nalini? Any suggestion that we're not?
Okay. There's no request for the floor, so we can move ahead.
Okay. So on 5 bis, the second sentence of paragraph 5 had referenced the opportunity to consider linkages to other relevant agreements and initiatives. And this is an issue that really quite a large number of the submissions addressed as being very important, both to capitalize on the efforts, the reporting efforts, and the energy that is going on in the chemicals and waste areas outside of this instrument, and also to avoid duplicative reporting. So there was sort of a dual purpose that came out in the submissions. So the idea that there's other information and data out there in these international processes that could be useful, as well as the idea that it's difficult for governments and others to continue to be reporting on the same kinds of issues in different fora. I also think that there was a note from Canada that I think we weren't able to quite put in 5 bis because it seemed a little bit detailed, but we do think the spirit is important, which is to the extent that there is reporting that goes on that is relevant, that could be useful to ensure is also seen in the new instrument. It would be good for that information to be in and available before governments started reporting. So I'm not sure that we've captured that sentiment, but we've certainly noted it. And so I'd like to go ahead and open discussion on 5 bis. It is one very long sentence, but hopefully we can sort of get through it. And if you would make your interventions perhaps in the order that it, or your comments in the order that they appear in the paragraph, that would be helpful. But again, this is about taking into consideration information that's out there, both to minimize data as well as to ensure that there's an opportunity for a cohesive picture. And sorry, I'm just looking at the chat box. right? So again, like we're on paragraph 5 right now, and we would like to sort of to stay on that. The idea of the body of experts is in 3 bis. We talked about that for a long time at the last session, and we will certainly come back to that. So again, I'd like to open the floor for comments on 5 bis, please.
Okay, no requests for the floor in the chat with the hands raised function. In the chat, of course, there's some comments around 3 bis, but I think, like you mentioned, Carissa, you'll raise that and please bring your point on 3 bis at that point. So that
yes.
you get confused.
And I noticed just a quick note that popped up from Jill Hannah with respect to operationalizing the verb should. And so Jill, I just wanted to come back to you and ask if you had, a suggestion that you would want to see included to address sort of your operationalization suggestion.
Thank you very much, Carissa. I haven't wanted to take the floor too often. So, I mean, this is a very general point across the text. In very many places, there is a should, which is that we would like this to happen. But if we really want it to happen and to make sure that our reporting and the reporting of, for example, the MEAs is as tightly woven together as possible so that those doing the reporting haven't got to formulate the information in 2 different ways, then we need an actual active dialogue with others. And we actually also need their permission in some cases to use their reports. So it's difficult to do this off the top of my head, but something obtained through complementary, if you turn it round a little bit by reporting, as well as to minimize the burden for all stakeholders, sorry, let me start at the beginning. I'm not being very coherent. In order to take into consideration linkages with other relevant agreements and initiatives, as well as to minimize the burden for all stakeholders, the future process, whatever the language for that is, invites other relevant agreements in initiatives and IOMC organizations to share information, data and information with the future process, and to incorporate and to consider how reporting processes can be effectively aligned. Now, that's not perfect drafting, but it's the best I can do off the top of my head. Thank you.
We're happy to take off the top of your head. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And with that, I think that we can move on to our next paragraph, which I believe is paragraph 7 and 8. So we talked a little bit about 7 and 8 sort of generically in our last meeting. I apologize for the lighting on my video. The sun is rising and coming in at just the wrong direction. Paragraph 7 and 8, we are going to take them together because they talk about national sort of action, and what we had discussed with respect to section B earlier is that with respect to paragraphs 1 and 2 earlier, and with respect to section B on what governments would do, that this, to you, at least in your submissions, seemed duplicative of our instructions in other places. So 7 says government stakeholders should prepare a national implementation report. I think the idea is that this entire section was on the preparation and of reports, which describes progress on a national implementation plan. We did address national implementation plans earlier in our other sections, and work on achieving the overall vision and the objectives and targets. And of course, that is the general direction of the entire instrument. So just looking at your submissions, I think that we felt that this was not a paragraph that you would feel is needed in the section on reporting. And I'm going to also open up paragraph 8 at the same time, because again, it went to some of the same ideas, that discussion of the national report on country implementation of the agreement. Again, that's what this paragraph would, or this section would be about, should include information from UN agencies and stakeholders. And so I believe, Vasilios, I hope I'm not misremembering, but I think that the EU submission in particular noted that this seems obvious, and that instead of laying out the obvious things that would be needed in a report, that if there were something specific, that maybe that would be included, but that otherwise, I think as co-facilitators, we felt that the EU's, sort of pointing out that this information does not need to be noted is necessary. So I see Vasilios saying indeed in the chat box, so thank you very much. That I at least captured that correctly. And our proposal then is that we don't need to have these paragraphs or the sentiments in these paragraphs included at this point in the section G. So I'd like to open the floor with respect to that. And again, I think you'll see that it's not that we don't think that some of them are a good idea, but that they've been captured in other places or aren't needed. So Nalini, I'm gonna turn the control back to you, and we'll give a few minutes for people to respond. Thank you.
Okay, seems that no one's asking for the floor, so it's clear, I hope.
Thank you very much. I hope so too. We certainly tried to put the context in that would make it so. Okay, so Alexander, if we could ask you please to move to the next slide, which is paragraph 6. So paragraph 6, go back to my notes from our last session. Paragraph 6 had several parts. It talked about making these reports being made available to stakeholders in a timely fashion to facilitate discussion. With that concept, in your submissions, you noted that there's going to be an agreed schedule that will produce, review, revise, and finalize the reports. And therefore, that in this section, it's not necessary to include this step. So we as co-facilitators agreed with that. And so we don't think that that particular reference was needed. And then with respect to and allow for adaptation and response to any issues of concern, it was noted that the reporting function in and of itself, which is sort of what this section is about, will not provide the response to any issues of concern. And therefore that this sentiment, while perhaps important in general, to the overall concept of our new instruments, that it's misplaced in this particular paragraph. And again, we as co-facilitators agreed with those comments in the submission. And then finally, with respect to the effective review, evaluation, or updating of the report, as you know from our conversation earlier this month, that entire concept of updating, evaluating, and having an effective review of the instrument is captured in section A on updating the instrument, or in section A of the international conference, but not in section G. And we agreed also with your submissions with respect to that. So from our perspective, we did not think that paragraph 6 had anything in it that we needed to carry forward in our proposals. So we are seeking your views on whether you agree with that. So again, in our usual silent procedure, if there is agreement on that, then that's great. Thank you so much. Or if you would like to offer a comment or your views, we'd like to open that paragraph now. Thank you so much.
Here we have Alexandra Katova from Housekeeping. Alexandra, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Nalini. Thank you for the explanations. In general, we would prefer to keep the whole paragraph because to us there are too many unclear elements concerning, for instance, that there will be an agreed schedule. So the question is, where will it be? And also on the other functions, it would be good to have these other texts already as a clear text, and then later this can be adapted. So since we think the content is very important, we should make clear all this goes to, and that this is secured, and then maybe then this can be deleted, but not now. I think this is too early in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I guess I'd like to just to go back to that. I mean, I think, again, as we're trying to sort of narrow issues to see what it is that we would actually, as a group, like to see in this section. So I'd like to work backwards, perhaps, on your comments. So I take your point on wanting to make sure that there is a timely mechanism to make sure that the reports are made available, and that I think obviously they would facilitate discussion, but that's the idea. But I take your point on that one. I guess I'd like to maybe work backwards and say there's an entire section on the effective review, evaluation, and updating of the approach. So I'd like to seek at least your agreement that that last phrase is already clearly covered in section H, and that we wouldn't need to hold open in section G that concept. So if I can ask you to come back in on that, and then to allow for the adaptation and response to any issues of concern. I'd also be interested in sort of hearing your views on that, because I think the reporting is probably not going to provide the adaptation and response to any issues of concern. And I'm wondering if your point on this may be more that the sort of like everything else, the reporting will contribute to the assessment of whether the objectives and the strategic objectives and targets and the milestones and indicators are being reached. And so I'm trying to just narrow the issues that we need to carry forward, because otherwise we won't make any progress. So if you feel comfortable with the idea that the timeliness fashion is something we do need to carry forward, and we need to find a way to do that, I'd appreciate your agreement that that is what you're looking for with that part. And then I'm seeking your agreement that the last part is covered in section H, and we wouldn't need to continue that forward. And then perhaps some explanation on what you're thinking in terms of the adaptation response to any issue of concern as framed here for the reporting. So is it okay if may I turn that back to you?
Alexandra, you're unmuted, so you can speak.
Yes, sorry, I was consulting with the group to whether this is okay. And sorry, it takes some time.
I just wanted to make sure that you knew you were unmuted.
Yes, but we think it is covered in age, and yes, from evaluation or updating of the approach. This from there on, we think that this can be deleted here, and the rest should be retained. Thank you.
I have seen Jacqueline Alvarez's hand up, but now it's gone down. So I don't know, Jacqueline, if you would like to take the floor, maybe just raise your hand again. Unless you're having troubles. Okay. Oh, it's a mistake. Okay. All right.
Okay. So thank you very much. I appreciate your comments on that. And now we are moving. Let's see, I'm going to do a time check, 9:47. Okay. Let's move to paragraph 12A, please. So as we discussed last time, 12A is actually where a lot of the sort of what we would call in the US meat of the conversation happens. It talks about the frequency, it talks about a number of the modalities that one might use, when it should happen, whether it's key targets, etc. And I recognize that this is probably one of the most important paragraphs of G. And given that we only have 12 minutes left in today's discussion, I think what I would like to do is sort of put this on hold and have this be the primary purpose for which we would return to section G for further discussion. So I know that might be disappointing to some of you, given that this is, I know, near and dear to your hearts and how often this would happen. But I also think probably as a group, we are not ready to fully make the decision anyway. So Nalini, I'm gonna ask us to sort of make sure we put 12A at the top of our agenda for our next discussion on section G. And ask us to turn quickly to paragraph 12C. So 12C was a paragraph that we did get quite a few comments on, and most of them sort of suggesting that it wasn't actually a very helpful paragraph, and that to sort of direct us to sort of have the taking stock of progress be useful was not what we would want to see in an instrument. So the first part of this is proposed for deletion simply because your comment suggested that it was not appropriate for the text or for the direction. The second part was allowing for ad hoc review of activities, particularly for the purpose of amending or updating to better align with global chemicals and management trends or advancements, or to respond to emerging policy issues. So again, with respect, I just mentioned our views on be useful. With respect to allowing for the ad hoc review of activities, et cetera, through the end, in the submissions, a number of you noted that the updating or the aligning of the instrument is best addressed either in section H on updating the instrument or on section A, but not in section G. And therefore, we did place a footnote, and I'm not sure if you can see that on the screen or not, but we did place a footnote that we would insert to ensure that the virtual working group agrees that there would be some sort of, that should there be some sort of ad hoc or periodic review process out of 3 bis, that these linkages are not lost. And I'm just going to read for you the text. Actually, I don't need to read for you. In the co-facilitator's proposal at the bottom, you will see footnote 6 that talks about this, that this particular text would be further considered as a function of that periodic review group, and that the linkages to section A and H would be fully considered. Further considered. So with that footnote, we would like to ask that that paragraph 12C would be deleted in section G, but that the footnote 6 would remain. And just to note that the text of footnote 6 does include the language on ad hoc review of activities. I'm hopeful we can open up the floor for comments on that proposal from us.
Hand from that.
Thank you very much. It's just because this is a footnote that from what you've said, Carissa, and I have no position on the substance of this particular point, but I'm just trying to understand what we're doing. Would the footnote, as it becomes, then say something like the VWG agrees that there should be an ad hoc or periodic review group? And it's the word agree, because we were told, and David repeated it at the beginning of our meeting, that we are not negotiating now. Now, of course, we're all here to try and clarify, and we're all wanting to make a face-to-face meeting much quicker. But I have to say that as a stakeholder, we get a bit bothered if we are deemed to have agreed things when we were told we were not negotiating. So I just need whatever clarity you can give me, and maybe it's very difficult. I'm not trying to be the awkward squad, but I am confused. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to. It could say recommend. There's no problem. We can simply replace agree with recommend. That, you know, should the virtual working group recommend that there be an ad hoc or periodic review group? I mean, I think yes. I mean, it is difficult to do this. I mean, we do need to sort of, you know, again, to sort of quote the president, to capture the agreement. That was her command to us in order to make progress. And so why don't we just change agree to recommend? We are obviously not trying to lock anybody into anything. I think what we are trying to do is put together our proposed virtual working group recommendations to IP4. And I would hope that by the end that what we have done is created sort of agreement on all of us on that recommendation, and that agreement goes to that recommendation. And again, it's my understanding that the Bureau has agreed on a process by which IP4 will look at the recommendations from all of the virtual working groups and make a decision on what to do with that. And that's obviously out of our hands, or at least my Chirapan and I's hands, for further discussion. So why don't we just, there's no disagreement with what you said. We all agree sort of what the process is and what we're doing and not doing. So why don't we just change footnote 6 to say recommend, and that should I think give everybody the comfort that they need.
Okay, we have Alexandra next.
Thank you for giving me the floor again, and sorry for taking it again, but we haven't said much in the first 2 hours. So yeah, on what you just said, I think that agreeing on something is really not what we want, but of course recommendations can always be made. So just somewhat reflect on what you just said. And now on paragraph 12C, we think that this paragraph, the purpose of the paragraph is to allow to take information from the reports on an ad hoc basis when needed, to use it, for instance, to work better in the emerging policy issues or on issues of concern. So I think the purpose of this 12C is to make this information and the reports available in a way that it is easy to access and easy to be used on an ad hoc basis. And therefore, we think it does not fit to A or H, to section A or H. And it is really very much connected to the nature of how the information is presented and can be accessed. So therefore, we think this really has a place here and makes a lot of sense. And if there is a problem with the wording be useful, then this be useful can be deleted, and we start with allowing for ad hoc review. So taking the nature and the purpose of this paragraph, we really would like to keep it here.
Okay. Then there is a comment from Sue from Japan in the chat box. We do not need to produce a report that needs ad hoc group to translate. I don't know if Suki would like to take the floor to elaborate. Okay. Yeah, then no one else is asking for the floor.
Sorry, was I on mute? Sorry. I just thank you. And I just I'd like to go back to the NGO group and sort of on your last comment, because I hear you on that. I guess we just talked earlier about, and I noted in your comments the importance of having that information publicly available so that it can be used. And so I kind of wanted to go back to paragraph 3, which we just looked at, and which we just talked about the importance of stakeholder data and information being made available and being able to be shared publicly to allow for a comprehensive and cooperative review of the overall progress. And so I guess I'm again, I hate to go back to you after I just went back to you on your last comment, but it feels like there isn't anything new in 12C that we didn't agree to already, again, agree in quotes, to in paragraph 3. So I want to make sure I'm not missing what you're feeling is the new concept in 12C compared to what we just agreed with in paragraph, or what we just discussed and moved forward with in paragraph 3. And I recognize that you do have a large group to coordinate with, and so we can certainly come back to this. We are going to run out of time in just a few minutes, so if you have a thought on that, I would love it if we could share it in this group, so we have some direction for our next review of this text. Okay, fair enough. Thank you so much. Just for those of you who can't see the chat, Alexandra noted she'd come back shortly on that question. So before we finish, it is 10 o'clock. I'd like to take just a few minutes and do much better than we usually do in terms of timing, but turn to the next slide, which is paragraphs 13 and 14. So paragraphs 13 and 14, we put on the same slide because we are of the view that they currently address very similar topics and very similar issues. So in thinking about what we want to have happen, paragraph 13 talks about taking into account the reports compiled and developed or disseminated by the Secretariat and evaluated by the International Conference. That basically means reporting. The International Conference may decide to carry out reviews as needed of the effectiveness of specific areas of action. And so I think we want to sort of get a better understanding from those of you that proposed this idea, what you had in mind when you referenced carrying out reviews as needed of the effectiveness of specific areas of action. And whether that is, again, direction that perhaps, to use Jacqueline's words, is too granular, of whether the International Conference is already authorized to do this if needed. And that, I think, is one point that did come out in some of the submissions. So we'd like to just press a little bit more about, for the proponents of a paragraph 13, what you think that would cover that is not already covered or already authorized in Section A to the International Conference. And then on 14, it talks about the overall effectiveness of the instrument should also be evaluated, taking into account the reports. Again, that has some elements of paragraph 13. So for those of you that perhaps were proponents of paragraph 13, whether you would feel that most of 14 covers that already, would be interesting. That this overall effectiveness evaluation should take place. And again, there's a difference of views on the timing. And I'm not proposing that today we try to talk about the timing of the effectiveness evaluation. I think we need to go back first to 12A and talk about the timing of the reporting itself and what that's going to look like. And then we can come back and talk about the timing of the effectiveness evaluation. But what I would like to open in 14 is the idea that 13 is very much included in 14. And so if I can open, and I'm sorry, I'm getting tired and perhaps not as articulate as I would have liked to have been on this issue, but I guess what we'd like to do is open paragraphs 13 and 14 and see if there is a sense that there's anything in 13 that is not already in 14 or would otherwise need to be more specific in other areas. And so if we could, Nalini, if you will keep an eye on the chat box and the hand raise function, we would be interested in sort of your quick and general views on these two paragraphs. Thank you.
Okay, so we have Suzanne from Canada. Suzanne.
Okay. When these were initially drafted, I believe, by the co-chairs, it was a recognition that periodically there are reviews of effectiveness done, for instance, as we had done with the QSP. So that's what sort of that paragraph 13 would look like. But it's also a recognition of the need for that overall evaluation as per the very useful graphic we had from Japan. And so I think the point in paragraph 14 is slightly different. It's about asking when the evaluation, if we're going to have a timeless vision and a process that doesn't have like a 2020 date that we're aiming for necessarily, when would we periodically want to do that overall, call it evaluation process of the program? And the text here suggests it might be as a timely sort of check mark for the 2030 agenda refresh. But that, my understanding, is the intention here. And so merging them may or may not make sense. I'd suggest we'd need maybe 13 less than we'd need 14 rather than the other way around. Thank you.
Carissa, there's a comment in the chat box from Japan.
Thank you. Yes, so Japan is talking about to not a group or a body or committee to include all the views as being, unless that's absolutely necessary. Thank you. Yes, their proposal did include a sort of a yes/no questions for process indicators and welcoming all participation and showing progress in a dashboard. So impact indicators for custodians, IOMC, to be administered, introduced from the SDG. So a sort of a summary of how they were thinking about it. Okay, so Canada, thank you for your clarifications. It's always nice to have a little insight into perhaps what the co-chairs might have been thinking with their original proposal. That was actually certainly very helpful for us. And as we look forward to sort of thinking about how these two paragraphs and what's needed based on your input, we will take that into account. So thank you very much.
We have a request for hand from UNEP, Jacqueline.
Okay.
Yes, very sorry. I was reading again the last sentence of paragraph 14, and in a way, because of the experience that we have with the conventions, with the MEAs, they always try to indicate the time when effectiveness evaluation should take place. It's very challenging. So one suggestion is to request the ICs, the conference, to decide and not just indicate here in the text of the instrument the timing or the renewal of the strategy when it can come, if it is in a regular process. I think it's the safest at this moment. If not, what happens is that the year that ICCM meets might not be the years of the evaluation, so then you have this not matching time frames, which is not healthy at the end of the day. Thanks.
Thank you. Just to make sure that I understood, you were sort of suggesting the addition of, as decided by the conference in terms of timing, right? Jacqueline, can I just confirm that what you were asking for is the addition?
Yes, so she in the chat box, she said yes.
Oh, just people are too quick for me in the chat box. I can't do. Okay. All right. So on the timing, just to go back before everybody gets a little like, I think we want to save the question of the timing for later. So I am going to add into my notes, Jacqueline, your suggestion of as decided by the conference. You will include that in brackets along with the rest.
And we have comments as well in the chat box as well on it.
On this one? Okay, so should we evaluate? Yes. Okay.
Oh, and number 12C from Alexandra as well.
Okay, let's go back to that in a second. So I think the link to the timeline. Okay, so I believe Olga, unless you disagree, I think everything that you're looking for within the brackets is there. So it's a question of how those things get packaged together. So let's keep that. Nalini, we save our chats, right? I can come back to this and okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. I'm making a note to myself to suggestion chat box in brackets. Okay, thank you very much. Do we have anyone else on 12 and 13?
Oh, so there's 12 from Alexandra.
I'll go back on 12.
Okay.
Let's for the moment, let's.
Who's on somebody not me.
Okay. Okay, so I think we've exhausted perhaps 12 and 13. Okay, Alexandra, if we could go then, all right, so let's close our discussion on that. I would like to go back to 12C. To get my paragraph right. And Alexandra, I do think you have something on the chat box, but perhaps you can explain. So I know some folks are having trouble seeing the chat box.
Okay, thank you. No problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, we discussed it, and so we are open for a deletion, but we would first like to see respective text in 3, because the reason for that is there is good language in 3. However, it misses this ad hoc element, which is necessary to open up possibilities for using the information, for instance, for ad hoc reports on urgent matters, or, I mean, for everything that would come up. And sometimes if we have to wait for the regular reports, which may come out, I mean, sometimes it takes really a long time until reports being released. So therefore, we find it very important to keep this ad hoc element somewhere. And it's no problem to put it in para 3, but it would be good to have this language first before we delete para 12C.
Certainly. Okay. Thank you for your flexibility. I appreciate that, and we will work on that then. Thank you very much. Okay. So just a quick sort of summary. So we did not get to 3 bis, which is, I know, again, much like 12A, very important to many of you. So we will go ahead and figure out within with Nalini and her colleagues within our schedule when we will be going back to Section G. We will open Section G with discussion of 12A and 3 bis to ensure that they have opportunity for your comment. I would ask just, they are complicated paragraphs in the sense that they don't have we took a lot of submissions and we took the compilation text, and we didn't have a lot to work with in terms of structure. So I would ask that as you leave this meeting, you would make a note to yourself to please spend a little time looking at paragraph 12A and paragraph 3 bis, so that you can see what pieces are in it, and we will certainly come back to that and do our best. So in terms of next steps, let's see. I made some notes to myself on this, and Nalini, I can't find my notes to myself on this, and everybody I think would like to be done. Oh, no, I did. I found them. So in terms of next steps for our January 7 meeting, which is our next meeting, we will hope to have at least one further proposal for your review, and whether that is Section E, Section G, or Section H, I can't tell you that yet. Tirabhan and I will consult with each other and do our best to put something forward to you that gives you time to look at it and hopefully make some progress in the direction on one of those sections. I don't think we will be able to promise you more than one, because the rest of our time in that session is supposed to be dedicated to the science policy interface, which we know is of great importance to all of us in this virtual working group. So we will put this out in a note to you, but as a little preview, I think what we would like to ask you to do for our January 7th session is to be prepared to have a sort of a concrete discussion on how we might operationalize the need that we see for a science policy interface in a new instrument. And so what that does is it means that we will be discussing and sort of trying to come to a sense of the room on what the need for the science policy instrument is, or the need for for a role for science in this instrument. And again, we're going to put aside whether it's an ad hoc body or whether it's option A from the UNEP presentations the other day, but sort of see if we can define the need that you all see for a science policy interface and what that would do, and then talk a little bit about once we hear each other on what the needs are, think a little bit sort of freely about how we might operationalize that need. So that will be your instructions from us for a productive discussion on January 7, and we will apologize in advance that we too are hoping to take a little bit of a break over the holidays. It's been a long sprint for many of us, both on your end, but certainly on ours, to prepare all of these documents and to read submissions, etc. So I think Tirabhan and I are hoping to have a virtual working group free couple of days at least over the next 2 weeks and holidays for many of us. So I hope you will allow us to have that time, and we will beg your forgiveness if you don't have exactly what you might want with the amount of time that you might prefer to review. So we look forward to seeing everybody in January, and we thank you for a very productive discussion today. And I put my glasses back on to read Suzanne's chat, but it looks like, oh, thank you, Vasilis. That's very kind of your kind words. A note from Canada that says, before we want to go, we just want to flag that we will want to suggest that before the text is finalized, we will want to review it to ensure it meets our goals. Of course, of course. Okay, and to Mr. Volker, I can't promise you anything on what dates we can get you the text, but I can assure you that Chirapan and I will do our very best to get it to you as quickly as we can, taking into account the fact that our families might need to see us for a little bit of time over the holidays for us too. We haven't had a lot of time for them over the course of the last month and a half or so since we started this effort. So we will do our very best. Canada, yes, thank you very much. Of course, we will be putting everything forward, and I think the UK also would be supportive of that from their earlier intervention. So with that, Chirapan, can I turn it back to you and see if you have anything to add before Nalini? We would ask you to formally close the meeting.
Nothing much from my side. I just want to say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year in advance, and have a nice holiday for you all. So, and don't save some time to review our proposal to prepare for the next meeting on January. Okay, bye-bye.
So just from our side, the Secretariat wishes everyone happy holidays. As for the speaker, be safe, be healthy, peace, all the peace that you can get, and rest, relaxation as well, because I think next year will also be a busy one. So we need to get our energy re-energized. And just for your information, we've just launched today the fourth quarter newsletter for SICAM. So please do read it. I will circulate it actually to the groups because we're not sure exactly who receives it, but please do have a look. It's got some nice messages in there, also from Gertrude Sander, the ICC Vice President, and others. Okay, have a nice day or evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nalini, especially for the support from the Secretariat. We certainly appreciate it.
Happy holidays.
Thank you, and thank you to all of your kind chats that we are getting and your kind notices in the chat box. We certainly appreciate those. Thank you. Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody.